Welcome to the LSI Behind the Wind podcast. My name's Sean Slatter, and for 30 years I've dedicated my life to the science of business development. I've seen the impact of our work, which has evolved into economic development and now social impact. I'm really excited for this episode, joined by a close friend of mine and someone who I really admire, General Bruce Burda. General Burda has an incredible history, which he's going to talk about, an amazing career with the United States Air Force, and he's also worked with a number of nonprofits, small businesses, and has been a part of our team for a few years now, and really excited to hold this discussion with General Burda. General Burda, thanks for joining me. Could we just talk about your background and your history, and let's talk a little bit about your time with the Air Force. I've got a lot of questions because you've got such an interesting Air Force career, but talk about your history and how you got into the Air Force, and then I'm going to ask you a lot of questions.
Thanks, Sean. It's great to be with you, and I've really enjoyed my couple of years with LSI. It's been a fantastic opportunity, and wonderful relationships and friendships have come from that. So thanks, and I'm glad to join you today. And hopefully, I have a couple of relevant comments that might help somebody. And it's great to participate in these. I grew up in Northern California, in a beautiful place on the north side of Monterey Bay on the coast, and my parents were teachers. So I only bring that up because out of the blue, when I was in high school, small private school, I told them that I wanted to go to the Air Force Academy. So they were very supportive, really supportive, even though I don't know if they really wanted me to do that. And so I ended up getting into the academy in 1973 and graduated in 1977. But I bring my parents up only because, through their support and upbringing through my entire childhood, and including the support for doing the administrative things and all the requirements to apply, I would never have started on that journey, which has led to my entire life. So it's important to parents make a difference and make an impact. And they certainly did for me. I graduated in 1977, which, for many, many years wasn't that long ago. And now it's nearly 50 years and 45 years. And that's a long time. But I went to pilot training, and I was a pilot for the first 12 years in the C-130. I was stationed over on the East Coast and overseas, where I met my wife, Stacy, in the early 80s, and had some great adventures flying that wonderful airplane all over Europe and into the Middle East, and had some great time. Really, from that point on, I bounced back and forth between operations and staff jobs. I had an opportunity to fly a couple of other airplanes, but the more senior positions I held, the less flying skills and flying responsibilities are part of the deal, and it's more about leadership and being a group commander, wing commander twice, once at RAF Mildenhall in northeastern England, about 70 miles north of London. We did that for about a year and a half, and that was great. And then I was a wing commander over at Bagram, Afghanistan, my last assignment from 05 to 06. In between and around those, we went to school a couple of times and was in the Pentagon for 3.5 year tours. So total of 7 years in DC, which was really incredible. I tried to never stop being in awe of having the opportunity to work in the Pentagon and meet amazing people, both within the Air Force and some of the other sister services, especially when I was on the Joint Staff for a couple of years. So that was really great. And then before I went off to Afghanistan, I spent about 4.5 years in the special ops community as a staff person. I ended up being the chief of staff at Special Operations Command, and then the director of operations, or the A3 now, for Air Force Special Operations Command. So that was a great community to get to know, since I didn't really spend any operational time as a younger pilot in that community, but there's some great heroes there and dedicated people. So my military career went by. I won't say it flew by, but it did. And just I was lucky enough to have a lot of great opportunities, good leaders that supported me, and teammates, especially more senior. I got deputy commanders, vice commanders, my number twos that were just terrific, and that it wasn't always the case for everybody, but a lot of my success stems from the people that I was lucky enough to work with and be around. So that was terrific. I had a amazing 29 plus year career, and it was time to move on, and so I did back in 2006.
Let me ask you a couple of things before we move forward in this timeline. But you and I, a few weeks ago, were at the U.S. Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs, and it was such an honor to be there with you. And I've been to the Academy several times and have had the opportunity to interface with the Academy leadership, and including General Johnson, who I really admire, a former commander. And but this was really a special time to be there with you. Everyone on that staff knows you. You either were. I thought it was so interesting to be there with you and have this experience where all of the senior leadership, either you were there with them as classmates at the academy, they had previously worked for you, or in some capacity you had this connection with the entire leadership. And I just wanted to mention that, how fun it was to be there with you and see these incredible cadets. You and I had lunch with all of the cadets that day that we were there together, and it's humbling to be with those kids. They are so good. They are so smart. They are really the best of America. Could you just talk for a minute about your experience at the Academy and your thoughts being back there a few weeks ago with me and interfacing with those cadets?
It was a great experience. I've been back for several reunions over the years, but not regularly from year to year. So every time I go, it's there are changes and interesting developments. The North Star to the organization, though, is really remains developing young people to be the leaders of tomorrow. Character development and education, the training is embedded in all of that. And so the academy continues through many societal changes to graduate very, very smart people that are ready, as much as 22, 23, 24-year-olds are, to be successful in the Air Force and to be good young leaders and then develop into more senior leaders. And one of the things that isn't talked about so much, but you can pick up on it once in a while, is that there's no shame in those that leave the Air Force at some point, whether that's at the 5 or 6 year point or a little bit later on. Part of the investment there is that all the academies are developing future leaders for America. And sometimes that maybe is overstated, but there's a long list from all the academies of people who have contributed both in the military and in business and in their local communities. So that training is never, and education really is never wasted, I don't believe. And so it was really a wonderful experience. I loved being there and walking around. There was certainly a lot of updates and changes that I was able to see. So it was great to go back and to kind of share that experience with some of the members of the group that we were with.
It was great being there with you and talking about some of the programs and the development of these kids that are just remarkable individuals. one of the cadets that I had lunch with, I was asking him, what do you like to do? And I was expecting him to tell me, oh, I play video games, or a lot of the typical things that college kids do. And he said to me, I said, what do you do for fun? He said, I lead the honor guard. And he said, it's my whole life. I love doing that. And I was shocked and humbled. And he said he was really excited. He said that he was going to go travel with the football team to Dallas to play the Air Force Army game in Dallas, and he was so excited about that. And I just thought it was great to be there with these kids, and it was fun being there with you. Okay, let's jump forward a bit. I'd love for you to talk about your time in Afghanistan. It wasn't that long ago, and there's a lot that's happened in Afghanistan since you were there, and I'd love to hear your memories of being there and leading this wing, and what was that about? What did you see there, and what are some of your memories of being in Afghanistan as the commander?
It's a great question. It was amazing opportunity. I although I didn't like being away, I did get home at some point during that year, but it was a long year from a family standpoint. But from a professional perspective, it was really incredible. So we invaded the fall of 2001 after the attack on September 11th. And we, at some point, either late in the year or early in 2002, established a home base there at Bagram Airfield. It's about 20 miles northwest of Kabul in Afghanistan. So they started the first couple of years. It was a matter of just getting basic security established and bedding down people and support equipment and aircraft that were operating from that location. So when I got there, basic wooden huts, B huts for living quarters were up and running, and we were operating out of the old Russian control tower to control airfield operations and flying off of their old runway, which was terrible. And during my time, we ended up having to close the runway every morning from about 2 to 5 to go out and make emergency repairs on the seams, because they built the runway out of concrete blocks, and they just lifted them in place and then tried to fill the seams in. So, it just like any non-interlocking blocks, they moved apart with the weather and the movements of the aircraft. So it was really a disaster. And actually, the runway that's been there for a long, long time, we started building during my year there, a parallel runway. But that itself was a huge challenge. And we had a C-17 that landed on the side of the run, misunderstood the lights, and it ended up landing on the edge of the runway and stopped off the runway with, I think, the wing hanging over the runway, and that was a heroic effort to get that whole thing, because the nose gear was completely collapsed. It was on a berm that it had created, and so we figured out with a great team of experts across all the servers. Everybody pitched in to help, and we ended up getting that nose gear on the back of a flatbed and towed it off. But that took about 24 to 36 hours. And in the meantime, we still operated A-10s and recovered airplanes on about 2/3 of the runway. They taxied around the wing of the airplane, and because we were flying combat operations with the A-10 and some other airplanes, the electronic warfare Navy aircraft. So that was another really interesting situation that required a team approach and problem solving. And it was I could talk for hours about the whole thing and have a CD with photos, but that was an interesting experience. But more broadly speaking, I was the wing commander and the air component command element. So we were advisory. So I had about 7 or 8 young officers that were part of the joint task force. So I commanded them, and it was the senior airman supporting the joint task force headquarters there at Bagram, but then I was also the wing commander. And back then, our Air Force people rotated in and out. They deployed for 4 months at a time. So I was the only one that stayed there for the year. And otherwise, my vice wing commander and everybody else in the entire wing of 800 to 1,000 people, they came in a matter of 4 or 5 days and switched out. And I did that 3 times. So part of that was an interesting opportunity to be the continuity for the people coming in and the people going out. And we certainly stressed that everybody talked to the people they were replacing to get as much information as they could. And it worked out well, but people came in and they worked really hard for 4 months and then they redeployed. And so that itself was a much different leadership experience than when you go into a normal installation and people are there for 3 or 4 years and things are running really quite well in most cases. And so it's just a matter of finding ways to make an impact and keep things going. Over there, it was it was a little different, and at the same time you're supporting combat operations, a lot of air support that supported the ground troops, the special ops and the Army as they were patrolling around. So I was really blessed to have, again, good leaders at the group level and the squadron level. Martha McSally was one of the A-10 squadron commanders there during my time. So she worked for the group commander who worked for me. And so I got to know her, and she was a tough leader, really, really good. So I was involved every day with everything that was going on. And so the days passed by quickly, but had really good, strong leaders, and they took care of their people, and they got the mission done. Fortunately, we didn't lose anybody during that time, although, we, as I had mentioned to you in a previous conversation, about a month after I got there, Operation Red Wing took place, where the special ops team was down, and they were trying to get the Navy SEAL Mark Luttrell, and that all happened. But part of that whole mission was the 13 special ops people that ended up dying in the helicopter crash. So that whole ramp ceremony of getting the transfer cases, the remains out onto the C-17 and departing was really eye-opening to see that number of our great heroes that gave their lives to supporting that mission and out. And that'll always stay with me, because it was a reminder that these missions were real, and there was real risks out there, even though, living at Bagram, we weren't under attack all the time, and it was fairly safe. But it was overall, there were some lows like that, but great people that were energized to come in, be safe as much as they could, and conduct their missions. Didn't matter whether they were administrative or medical or flying airplanes. Everybody was over there to do whatever it took to be successful, and it was pretty inspiring for sure.
I'd love to come back and talk about some more of these stories in Afghanistan. I'm fascinated what has happened there over the last 100 years, and then the recent events that are every day changing in Afghanistan. I had an associate of mine that has been going to Afghanistan and rock climbing and skiing in the mountains, and I cannot think of a more challenging place to go in and ski and climb than there. And so I've got some other questions that we're going to bookmark for a later date. But one of the things that you probably are not aware of that I think would be interesting to pull you in and get some guidance from you is many states have agreed to receive the Afghan refugees that have been flown to the United States, and we have been working with several organizations, mostly state organizations, on how can we use the LSI social impact methodology to benefit these refugees that have been received throughout the United States. And so at some point I'd love to come back and revisit this topic with you and talk some more about your thoughts and ideas in helping these individuals with life skills and being able to have a happy, successful life in the United States as refugees.
I think that would be terrific. I look forward to that. I know that when I was with the USO and ended up returning to Afghanistan later on, we ended up having a couple Afghanistan employees there at Bagram and a couple of other centers around the country. So I had a chance to interact a little bit with them, saw them in the dining facilities. So the military employed a lot. My point in bringing that up is that so many of them, the vast majority, are uneducated, but that doesn't mean that they're not intelligent. And so there's a big difference, and most of them are just trying to eke out a living over there. It's a very harsh country. Infrastructure is about as backward as any place that, if you can imagine, the most backward place anybody has been to in the United States, Afghanistan's probably worse. But the people are great. I wish we had the opportunity to vet more, because there's some nasty people over there. And I'm pretty sure that a few of them probably are in these groups, and maybe that'll be just history for them. But my point that I'm trying to stress is that these are good people, and they deserve a second chance. And I think there's with the programs that the government has and the funding, I think there is a great opportunity for LSI to leverage a big strength of ours and somehow support the government and the individuals, the Afghans that are starting to settle in. I think most of them are still in temporary quarters on military installations, and so that whole process is going to take quite a while to get them into homes and to start integrating into a regular community. So I think that would be terrific if there's a way that LSI can help with that.
Yeah, our team is working a lot of different strategies with various state agencies, and a lot of community colleges are very involved in helping these refugees to understand how to survive in the United States. And our team is working with some of these organizations. So I'd love to talk with you at some point about your thoughts on how our team can be effective in creating jobs and placing these individuals into these jobs, helping them create a new life. And it's an very interesting point in history, as you said.
It is.
One of the things that I find fascinating about successful people in our organization is that they oftentimes have this very eclectic background, and yet they're able to, whatever the situation is, it doesn't matter what it is, figure stuff out. And what you learned in Afghanistan, going in there and no infrastructure, there's no handbook to tell you this is what you have to do, this is how you're going to accomplish this. You had an objective, and your job, your role was to go in and figure this out. And I think it's interesting as we talk to a lot of, especially young, inexperienced executives in our business, they want a recipe, and oftentimes there's no recipe. I mean, you had this amazing background being an academy grad and a lot of training and education in the Air Force, but talk just for a second about there is nothing like going into a war zone in a third world country with nothing, no infrastructure, and figuring stuff out.
It's true. There was a lot of that. I'm sure I've forgotten more than I remember, but at the academy, there's a little contrails book full of information and quotes that you end up memorizing most of it during the course of your first year there. So General George Patton said, never tell people how to do things. Tell them what to do, and they will surprise you with their ingenuity, or words to that effect. And so leadership at any level, it doesn't matter whether you're a master sergeant and you've got a small group of enlisted people. I mean, they're solving problems all the time. So you have rules and regulations, you've got guidance, you've got verbal direction, all these things that, and you've got your experience and common sense and all these things that go into looking at a situation. And people were coming up with solutions to problems that didn't exist back home because of a variety of reasons, physical as well as process wise, and at all the levels, senior people had certain things, and, I don't have any probably earth shattering, success stories, but there was just a lot of encouragement to communicate. I learned probably along the way before I even got there that, you don't put people in leadership positions because they're smarter than everybody else or because they have they're going to solve all the problems. A leader helps the team solve the problems together, and encourage people to voice their opinions. And that environment during that year at Bagram Airfield was just, because of the infrastructure and because so many things couldn't be done the way they were supposed to be done back at your home installation, you had to come up with workarounds all the time. And so people at the lowest levels, all the way through the chain of command to where I was, we were constantly saying, okay, well, how do we do this? If we can't do it the right way, what's the next best way to do something? And once in a while you had to ask for permission, and sometimes it was just, well, we know we're not doing it exactly by the book, but this is the best way to do this safely here. And that's with recovering airplanes and launching them and fixing them, making sure that you weren't on the ground not supporting the troops on the ground, maybe in contact with the enemy, because some silly part wasn't working right. So you end up taking risks too. Risk management and taking risks is part of that equation of what you're willing to accept when it comes to less than perfect or less than optimum solutions for problems. And so to summarize, I think I was always impressed at people. We had a medical group there, and so they were constantly, although they had incredible equipment, I mean, it was still a field hospital, and so they needed to do some things, medically to keep people alive and to get them stabilized so they could fly back to Germany and get the full care that they needed. And so people were always coming up with smart ideas to solve problems. And the idea is not to find the one brilliant person that could come up with all the solutions. It's really about team management and getting everybody to realize that they might be the only one with their background and skill level that has the answer to that particular problem.
That's right. I've often asked, even internally, even with our own team, what's the profile? What does the profile look like for the right person in our industry? And I've really struggled with that. And what I've determined is there's a few things and patterns that I found. People that are successful in our business, in our industry, they figure stuff out. They go in and assess the situation, and they learn, and they bring the team together, and they collaborate. And it's like you going into Afghanistan and building a base out of nothing with no resources and a lot of challenges, and there's no manual. I had one of our executives the other day say, we need to build a manual for this. We need a process for this. And I said, yes, you can build some standards. The problem is, what do you do when you're faced with a situation like you were in Afghanistan, and all of those rules are out the door? So people fail when that happens. These individuals that I see that are successful in our industry and in the company, they work hard and they figure things out. They're going to learn about whatever it is, whatever the topic is. And even what I love about you and watching you in working some of these engagements is you've got this incredible subject matter expertise in a lot of things, especially national security. And yet you never stop learning. You were never impressed by your rank and your education. And that kills a lot of people, I think. I see a lot of people that come out with, I got a PhD in whatever it is, or I've got I graduated from Harvard, and they're so impressed with their education that they stop learning.
Yeah.
You never did.
Well, I appreciate that, and I'm a big believer in continuing to be engaged. And life is more than work. Life is more than family. Although all those are important, and God and family are probably a lot more important than work. But they're all important, and we shouldn't stop working at anything to be better and to help those around us. And so I think you've got to be committed. You need to be willing to work hard and to not be lazy and not to take no for an answer. It doesn't matter whether you're in Bagram and you're reaching back to a buddy at Tinker Air Force Base, and getting an idea, or getting 4 other people there in an office and say, hey, we need to solve this problem. And you guys are the right people to help me solve the problem. But you can't take no for an answer, and you got to be committed enough to say, we're going to fix this and solve this, and have that initiative. Like you said, not just, when you guys come up with, a manual that tells me how I'm going to do this, then I'll get on it. That's, that doesn't work. And our country wouldn't have been that way if we had people waiting for someone to create a roadmap on how to build the Intercontinental Railroad, instead of just saying, this is our dream, and this is that we're going to make this vision a reality. Because believe me, when they started, they didn't know how they were going to finish. I mean, they had a broad idea, I think, and you can apply that to so many things in our country's history. I mean, you need to have people with some vision and some ideas, but even with problem solving, that can be very narrow and technical, but you still need to be committed. You can't just say, well, think about it for an hour or two, and maybe I can come up with an idea. I mean, the people that are really successful, they just plow through one problem after another. And at the end of the week, they've accomplished a lot, probably with other teammates and not just by themselves. And so those that can recognize people around them and share successes, but also share the labor and work on things together. And I see that a lot in LSI. I've been able to do some things myself just because of my background, but there's a lot of people that you and I have had several conversations, and I've reached out to all sorts of people within the LSI family to help open up doors or to get me in touch with somebody. Just, got a email early this morning from Chris Wagner, and I got a contact over at SpaceX for you. So even though my primary role is a little bit different for LSI, you still have to work hard, put in the time that's needed, problem solve, and use all the resources that LSI has, which we talked a little bit about yesterday on the at the conference call. But there's a lot of resources that we have. I know I need to be smarter about what those are and to leverage them. But people are a big resource that have helped me be successful so far in what you've asked me to do for LSI, and so that all helps achieve success. It's not just one person giving something a shot for an hour and seeing if it works, but committed, dedicated people, which I think for the most part we're blessed to have. I know I was blessed in my entire life with having good people around me that were working tirelessly and solving problems. And sometimes they told me about them, sometimes they didn't. And sometimes I helped them solve the problems. That's part of what a leader does, but it requires just to be unselfish and to recognize others and to work together well with teammates, I think, to achieve a lot of success, no matter what you're talking about.
Absolutely, that's exactly right. And some of those things that we've discussed, I think, are critical elements for our business. That you never stop learning. You're curious about everything. That you're going to go in and figure stuff out, and you're going to work hard. And no matter what it is, and I mean, I've seen you in these situations where you're taking out the trash and and orchestrating the operations and helping with some of the logistics, and it's so amazing to work with somebody that you have this incredible illustrious career and the rank of general, and that you've got this incredible education and history, and it doesn't matter. We're gonna work this together and make this happen for the benefit of the organization, the benefit of the team, for the benefit of the mission. And I think that there's so many, especially new executives, new kids that are coming into the workforce, that are given responsibility, and they want somebody to tell them how to do it. They want somebody, they want a manual, they want an algorithm on this. And while some of that exists for, here's some general guidelines, and this is what we need to accomplish on the back end, go figure it out and work hard, right?
Yeah, I agree. I agree very much with that, and that our young people are so bright and are willing to work hard, but some need to be more comfortable in uncomfortable situations or without the path that well defined. The other thing that's interesting is, it's all about the mission, in my opinion. It doesn't matter whether you're in the military or not. Every organization has a vision and a mission, and it's interesting, just off topic a little bit, but, there's so much job hopping now. And I know that there's a lot of good with that, but, the idea that people are finding a company and then plan to work with them until they retire just doesn't make much sense for a lot of reasons now in our society. But with that, then it's how do you get somebody to be 100% in on the company's mission if they think that they're only going to be there for 3 or 4 years? I think there's a little bit of a challenge, a leadership challenge there, to inspire, that dedication and commitment to the organization, even knowing that they may not be there in 5 or 10 years. And a lot of that is the character that parents and schools and other people instill in people, and they bring with them, to the job. But nonetheless, it's still a challenge, I think, for company leaders to get the best that people they can to form their team, knowing that in today's society, you're probably not going to have everybody there in 5 or 10 years. So you get this. So it's a challenge, I think, from a leadership perspective, and as individuals, we just have to continue to be all in. And if that means, that doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to be someplace for an extended period of time, but while we're there, we're going to make a difference and work hard and help that company or that group be as successful as they can be. And if people have that attitude, then they're going to be successful no matter where they are.
Exactly. One of the things that is so interesting to me about your career as well is that you had this amazing career with the Air Force, and I've got so many questions still that we need to schedule another time to talk about some of these topics. But you left the Air Force, and in this commitment to the warfighters and their families, you went to work as an executive with the USO. And you talk about your time with the USO and some of the things that you learned. And where we're going with this is that a lot of organizations know us we're the business development company. You've got a campaign, hire LSI. You have a proposal, hire LSI. And the not-for-profits, the nonprofit NGOs that we work for, they're not Fortune 500 companies that most individuals in our industry would recognize, but it's a core competency of LSI that is rapidly growing, and we're going to talk some more about that in a minute. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on leaving the Air Force. I know you had a few stops before the USO, but what was that like going into the USO, working for a nonprofit with this mission?
Yeah, it was really interesting. When I started thinking about the position and learned about it and saw what the job description entailed, living in the Middle East, supporting our service members, I said, I spent my whole career doing that, taking care of, actually, because the more senior you got in the military, the more it's about taking care of your people so they can take care of the job. And I said, that could be really interesting. And I knew about the USO, but like so many probably of our age, I hearkened back to seeing the 1 hour TV shows highlighting Bob Hope's visit over to Vietnam. And those were, even as a young boy, I remember watching those, and, and he would be in all these crazy places. And that was all, that was a USO tour. So, so much more than that. They were overseas at a lot of places, and they specialize really in supporting the servicemen and women in remote and in hardship areas. But they've expanded and are almost at every installation around the country now too, because families, service members, young and old, and family members, need a lot of things, and not everything can be done by the military. There's laws and there's other things, so there's always a need. And especially overseas, I said, well, I'm up for another adventure. I didn't really envision doing that, when I retired, but I was very excited to get the opportunity to make an impact. And so we had around 80 people, I guess. So it was a small group, but we would have 2 or 3 employees at a center, and they were working to keep these centers open from 6 until midnight, sometimes all night long during football season, when games are on at 1 and 4 in the morning. I had a lot of responsibilities, overseeing the people and making sure budgets were set and followed and a lot of things. But for the most part, I didn't have the hard work. The people in these centers, and at one point we had 11 centers in Afghanistan, from the far western edge, close to the Iranian border, all the way to the eastern border, Jalalabad, and many in between. And like I said, the bigger centers, we would have 8 or 9 people. Many of these were doing the same kind of work with 2 or 3 people, and it was incredible. And when I got there, people were getting days off when they kind of could. And I said, well, if we're not scheduling that, it's not going to we're not going to get better at it. And, we asked too much of you. So that was one of the things, simple thing, but I just said, I'm authorizing and telling everybody, you need to schedule your people for 1 day off a week. Working 6 long days is nothing to be ashamed about. And, they love what they did and there wasn't much else to do. And I told them, I understand that, but, you deserve a day of downtime, especially in this environment where, and some of them were living with each other in tents and, so there's no privacy and all that. But it was very inspirational is the bottom line with both the USO employees that were sacrificing so much and the volunteers, because really the USO doesn't exist without military members and in some places family members volunteering their time. And we saw that in like I said, in Iraq and Djibouti and in the other Middle East and the UAE and places where we had centers, and the military members would come in on their time off and spend an hour or 3 or 4 hours, and they'd be serving other service members. So there was just a lot of examples of unselfishness and a desire to make a difference, even as they're in a deployed location as a deployed service member supporting other service members helping the USO. So the other thing I'd say is that even a nonprofit worries about money, right? A nonprofit doesn't mean that money is thrown around or not of a concern. So I would say it's actually the opposite. A nonprofit lives by donations and their projections will drive budgets. But ultimately, you have budgets in order to be good stewards of those donor dollars, and you've got to make it all work. And so establishing the budgets by center with the money that we were given, and then making sure that those monies were spent wisely, it was important. So the one thing that we didn't have to do a lot of over there, that all the other USO centers around and the regions around the world, the leadership is constantly working with donors and trying to, get more, because that's the lifeblood of the organization. Over there, and at that point in time, we weren't busy trying to raise funds at all. It just wasn't practical to be over in foreign countries trying to get companies to donate. So we were all about creating smart budgets and then executing to them responsibly, and that was a big part of it. But a lot of people don't equate nonprofits to managing their money wisely, and that was a really huge part of my job.
I always talk about these nonprofits. I love them for the passion and the commitment that these organizations have, and yet they're terrible business people for the most part.
Yes.
I mean, there are some very fine, exceptional nonprofit executives, but historically and categorically, we typically see these amazing individuals so passionate about what they're doing, and they are horrible at reading a balance sheet, looking at and so when I talk to our team about this practice area of working with nonprofits, all that is it's how the organization files its taxes. It doesn't mean that you don't have to do all of the really good business processes and tactics and strategies that a for-profit business does. I think it's horrible. It's the only industry that defines itself by what it's not. I think it holds back. Unfortunately, I think that concept of I'm a nonprofit holds a lot of these organizations back, unfortunately, because that's how they think. Nonprofit means we're going to be poor. We're not going to have revenue. We're not going to manage the margin of our business like a for-profit company organization does, corporation does. And I think a lot of these nonprofits get into this excuse of we're a nonprofit, and that's why we've been running in the red for the last 10 years, right? We are.
No, exactly. That, it's really a terrible misnomer, like you said. I mean, donor-funded company, donor-funded organization is probably, a little bit more accurate.
Yes.
It means that, instead of calculating overhead rates and profit margins, they have a great pressure on their development teams to engage and to do that part of their business well, because the better they bring money in, the more they can spend. But it still goes back to profit or not profit, whatever money you have, you need to make sure that it's in line with the vision and the mission, and it makes sense. I know that I would ask all the time, because you're with the USO, all the money you were spending on the service members and activities, I mean, it was making an impact. But I always was trying to get people to understand some sort of trade-off. So you give out a prize, a $500 TV or gift card or something to somebody as a prize, and I would, often just say, well, what about the person that came in second place, or what about could you give out a $200 prize and give out 3 $100 prizes and spread the impact to make additional people, get some of that. So we had those conversations all the time, because, at some point you're never going to be perfectly fair, nor can you just, give out equal shares of cookies or gift cards, so there's a trade-off and a balance. But for LSI people that work with not-for-profits, their source of funding is different, and that whole process is very not so much complicated, but it's hard. It's hard to develop relationships and get people to really write checks, although a lot of them are corporately funded, but ultimately they get more money from families and small checks. Just a lot of people giving $10 and $20, but that's a whole part of that process that is separate. I understand that, but from that point on, there should be no excuses as to operating the business like any other business. Your source of your budget may come from a different way, but at that point, you better have all the processes in place and the guidance to make sure that people are, your staff properly and not too lean and underperforming, but not too fat that you're wasting money on staff and not on mission execution funds. So it's a balancing act, but it's all important, and the debates are sometimes a little different, but ultimately that company has to make hard decisions and make good decisions in order to avoid operating in the red, to at the end of the year to spend the money that they have.
Absolutely. I even see this with a lot of nonprofit NGO organizations, where they'll take it a step further. Even we talk about business development for nonprofits, and even the boards sometimes, who are very incredible business people, that doesn't register with them, that just like any other organization, the heart of this is your revenue, and you're going to capture revenue through business development. And it's almost like a lot of times the boards and the executive director and the staff, they get this mindset of, oh, it's bad for us to go out and raise money through business development, through capture and proposal, which is the same business development methodology and science that we use for a Boeing or an AT&T. you're going to take that same concept into a nonprofit, an NGO, a 501c3. Yet we are often pulled into these strategies where this is such a foreign concept for the staff, for the executive director, and even the boards. And what we're experiencing, especially right now, we've talked a lot over the last several weeks about the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, this multi-trillion-dollar stimulus funding. It's being pushed into these organizations that are government organizations, not-for-profit organizations, and they're struggling to manage the capture of these funds, the proposal development, which many of these organizations are unaccustomed to, and then administrating these funds like a for-profit organization. And I mean, that's something that I think has helped us grow this incredible not-for-profit NGO practice that many of these organizations are unaccustomed, unwilling. They think it's icky. They're so focused on the mission. We would not get in the weeds on going after funding to make this happen. And that's just not logical from our background. I mean, you want to talk about that for a minute?
I totally agree. I was on a board for a couple of years here, Honoring America's Veterans, a nonprofit. They're a Phoenix-based group that would like to go national, but still is focused primarily on funding and planning and executing the Veterans Day Parade in Phoenix. It's a big deal. And at some point, they created this nonprofit to take over for what the VA and other people that couldn't do it anymore. And so they don't have a big paid staff, or it's not that kind of nonprofit. And the parade is great, but it was a little frustrating because they wanted to do more. They wanted to do more than just get enough funding to properly and safely conduct the Veterans Day Parade. It was hard to get the board members to move forward, and because you need a little bit of a vision and a well-defined goals to determine where you want to be, and then you can talk about how you get there. So we never really could come to any good agreement on what we really wanted to do. And my point was, well, before we go national, we need to be able to have a presence and widen our impact within the state. I mean, if we don't know how to do anything within the state before we start trying to do something in other states, we've got to get a model that works. And I felt like we had a pretty good budget, and we were getting great support from several companies, so the funding was adequate for the parade. But I said, if we're going to go out and ask more and more people and organizations for more money, I said, we need a story to tell what we're going to use that money for, because at some point you just can't say we're going to just have a bigger parade or a more expensive parade, and we wanted to do more. And we kind of had these circular discussions without really a lot of progress. And I just, and we didn't have a coherent business development plan in expanding the donor base, but then we didn't have a compelling reason to ask somebody to donate $100,000, because we couldn't tell them exactly what we're going to do with that, other than, well, we're going to continue to support the parade. And so it's important for us, I think, to not look at nonprofits, like you said, a lot differently. There are some differences. Revenue is generated through donations and not necessarily through sales and profit margins. But at the end of the day, these entities have money that they're spending, and if they want to do more, for nonprofits, if they want to make a bigger impact or do new things within their defined space, they need help in doing that. And we may or may not have experts on donor development, but a lot of that is very similar. And like you said, there are very common grounds with grants and other sources of funding that many of them probably don't even know about, and would be very beneficial for them to learn and to get support in pursuing those funds.
And I think that connecting the dots, trying to get a board, an executive director, and the organization aligned with, you've got this incredible mission. You've got this team that is passionate about the work. You're going to need to enable that, to facilitate that passion and accomplishing the mission. You need revenue to fund that. You're not going to be successful if you've got this incredible idea and no funding behind it. We see that all the time. You're not going to be effective if you're running the organization in the red for 10 years. You're not, right? So taking some very basic concepts and connecting that to the passion and dedication of the team to the mission is helpful, but that can be a challenge, and we do that all the time with nonprofit organizations. And I think why we've been successful over the last 50 years working with NGOs and these 501c3s, 501c6s, and even government organizations. I mean, they're very similar in a lot of ways. You and I have seen this, where these government organizations have great ideas and dedicated people, and yet there's no business acumen within these organizations, and connecting that. You need revenue, and you're going to get revenue through business development, some of the things that LSI does. What I'd like to do for just a few more minutes before we wrap up, we have you working several engagements, but one of the engagements that you've been working for some time now is a very interesting nonprofit. It was, and I'll let you expand on this, but it was the foundation of it. The foundation of the engagement started many, many years ago. I was contacted by a close friend who said, I'd like you to come in to this organization. It's a nonprofit. This was about 10 or 12 years ago. Help us build a strategy, which we did. And as I learned about this organization that has a storied history, it was started after World War II. There was this idea that America would lose touch with the importance of national security. And this organization was founded through General Eisenhower before he was president, and James Forrestal, the first Secretary of Defense, that founded this amazing organization that has a great mission to educate and evangelize communities, America, around the importance of national security. They eventually, this board eventually gave us a little more responsibility, and about 5 or 6 years ago turned the majority of the operations over to LSI, and you lead that engagement. As we, I've got so many more things that we could talk about, but I know you and I both have things that we need to work today besides this. Will you talk about your experience, really twofold? One is being the engagement lead for this nonprofit, and then also LSI's thought leadership around national security, which is, it pulls a lot of different elements of the LSI tools in the toolbox, the business development, the program execution, the process, the strategy, and then subject matter expertise around national security. It's a very interesting engagement, and you're the best person I can think of to lead this.
Well, thanks, Sean. On the first point, it's been real interesting supporting our client in developing the content for these virtual conferences that we held for almost a year and a half, and now we're transitioning back to the travel one. So, yeah, I did spend a lot of time in addition to once we developed, proposed, and got approval for conference topics, had a pretty much of a clean slate to figure out what we would do. We collaborated as a team with Josh Johnson and a couple other people, and especially early on how we would approach covering a certain topic. And I realized fairly quickly that there wasn't going to be a perfect answer. That most topics you could find 100 people to talk on from different perspectives, and there's content that it goes across a spectrum. So it was a matter of coming up with things that were mostly relevant current events wise, as well as meaningful for the association membership. So we could have done things a lot differently for every one of these conferences, but I think at the end of the day, we were blessed to be able to have retired military, some active duty military, experts in think tanks and other organizations that shared their thoughts and opinions on things. And I think that is important for the mission of these members, because they're business and civic leaders around the country. And so providing them with the information and some thoughts helps all of us be more educated, more aware of what's going on, and to get a better idea of what the truth is. There's so much communications now and sources of information, and they're not labeled like meat, that this is suspect, this is mostly good, this is great, exact, correct information. And so, you have a lot of information floating out there. And so these conferences have helped me, and hopefully the members, learn more about what our military, our service members are doing, in some cases, our State Department. And, we've had a few sessions where opinions were offered and that kind of thing, which were intriguing. But for the most part, we're learning about what in fact is going on, who's doing what, whether that's with the new United States Space Force or the National Defense University, and how they're helping to support their students and people around the countries around the world. We ran the gamut of topics, and we'll continue to do that. So I think it's been fascinating. I do think that one of the things that, if the opportunity presents itself, is for LSI to help a little bit in membership revenue. I don't know if it's both revenue and membership, but I definitely know that their membership is declining, and although they haven't asked for our help, I think that, it would be of interest for us to try to propose some strategies to expand their membership. So we'll see what happens with that. But otherwise, we're continuing to plan future conferences. And although COVID has caused a few problems, and we're overcoming those, and I'm excited about what we have planned for next year. And I think it's going to be good for LSI and good for the association. So I'm excited about that for sure.
I am as well. And it's we've talked a lot about different things that are really non-traditional LSI services. As I said before, I often hear individuals or organizations that have worked with us for years, and they have this mindset about LSI. You work for the Fortune 500 companies, and that's what they envision LSI's full capabilities are. And then they're always surprised when I start talking about some of these other projects that and engagements that we've worked for years, for sometimes 20, 30 years, providing business development for nonprofits, providing execution where we do everything, manage the organization, manage the, if it's a 501c6, manage the membership. We've got a great story that we had talked about on a previous episode where we took a 501c6 from a few hundred members to 6,000 members in a short period of time, building consortia around membership, taking a 501c3 and helping them capture funding through grants and contracts, private foundations, government foundations that have allowed organizations that may have been $3-4 million a year to go to $100 million through our strategy and business development, and then successful execution on the back end. And channeling that passion that a lot of these organizations have with the LSI methodology has been so powerful. It has been this superpower for a lot of these organizations that maybe for 70 years have struggled, like one of these clients that we've talked about. And then tangent to this is LSI's subject matter expertise and thought leadership around national security issues. You have touched a lot of different individuals in LSI and different engagements even where we'll have an idea around, you mentioned the Space Force, for example, and this is a new organization, and we were pulling members of the LSI team to help orchestrate, understand, build an education around this new concept of the Space Force. It was so powerful. You got to see that firsthand. I know that we do a lot of other work as well outside of DoD. A lot of our nonprofit 501c3, C6, and NGO work is not connected to DoD in any capacity, and so, but having you connect to the team and see that thought leadership, and you're driving a lot of that too. I love you thinking about what's next. What does this look like in the next year, in the next 4 years, and so on. And I really, it's been so amazing to work with you in this capacity.
Well, I've really enjoyed what I've been doing. It's a great organization, and I've met some wonderful people. And as a member yourself, you know, they have some fantastic people from around the country that are part of the group. So that's been a lot of fun and exciting and hard work, but I've really enjoyed it, and I've grown and learned a lot about some things that I wasn't necessarily a subject matter expert on. So that's great. I do look forward to hopefully, you know, supporting some other efforts in whatever ways that LSI can use me. I know that you've just touched on a couple of examples of the kinds of work LSI is doing to support clients. And so if there's other ways that, you know, I can assist or whatever, I look forward to doing that. I think it's really important that, you know, there's a reason why they exist, right? The government probably doesn't and shouldn't tax people so much that there is no need for any nonprofits. I mean, I think there's a balancing act there, and there's no shame in having people needing certain things that only nonprofits are providing. It's an outlet, and I just think without getting into the political part of this, there are a lot of people that have dedicated their lives to helping other people through, a nonprofit that they work for, or a variety of things, whether that's through donations or as an employee. So having LSI support many of these and helping them to be successful is helping a lot of people get the help that they need financially, or with education, or whatever those nonprofits are targeting. So I think it's a great part of the portfolio that LSI has.
It is. It's a lot of fun taking these concepts that we have perfected in the for-profit sector
Yes.
into government organizations and into not NGOs, and seeing the success there. And I mean, I can tell you a story that a few years ago I met with a CEO of a very large 501c3 who was giving me a scenario where this individual had a budget deficit that was insurmountable and broken down, really struggling, because this individual was passionate about the mission of this organization. But the minute we started talking about, you've got this budget deficit because your expenses are higher than your revenue, and you either need to cut your expenses or you need to increase your revenue, which is what we can help you with on both sides. We transformed that organization, and it was remarkable. This organization is incredible. And for people in business, this seems logical. This seems like this should be something that any executive director or staff member of a nonprofit should know, or a government agency should know, and it's not. And so I think that's something that bringing these concepts to the NGO world is huge, especially now. I've never seen in my career, my 30-year career, I've never seen a time like it is now, where there is so much funding for NGOs and government entities, and yet most of these organizations, they don't know how to access it. They don't know how to do business development. They don't know how to manage this. So we have seen this spike in our NGO practice that I guess we really had not we had not anticipated, but we are working with so many 501c3s and 501c6s and not-for-profit labs that are in this dilemma of, we've got a great idea, we've got a great solution for a need. How do we fund that? How do we execute on it? All the things that we do for large Fortune 500 companies. So it's an interesting time for us, and I think some of the work that you've done that we can benchmark within other engagements is exciting, and I love it. I love what you're doing, Bruce.
Well, thanks. And I really have enjoyed it. I appreciate the opportunity, and look forward to trying to help make a bigger impact, for you, the company, and for LSI's clients.
Thank you.
It's a great organization.
Well, thank you. General Burda, this has been so fun. We have a lot left to explore, and I'd love to take this into some other narrow, deep and narrow subjects as we schedule some more of these. So for anyone that has listened to this episode, if you have an interest, if you are a nonprofit, NGO, 501c6, 501c3, and the other 501 categories, and you are interested in increasing revenue, you're interested in outsourcing the management under the LSI's program execution practice area, if you're interested in some of the funding that we've talked about over the last several weeks, how do we, as an organization, capture this work? How do we capture these grants through traditional business development methodologies? Reach out to us. We'll have somebody connect with you quickly. And similarly, if you have a need and interest to penetrate the Department of Defense, or you need subject matter experts around a national security topic, we likely will have individuals on our team that can help you with navigating this really interesting and ever-changing, rapidly changing market. Get a hold of us and we'll have somebody help you through this. Thanks again, General Burda. This was so fun, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you, Sean. I enjoyed the time together as always.